Awesome. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our panel today. I apologize, we're running a couple minutes late. We are one panelist short right now. They just are having a little bit of connectivity troubles, and we'll be back in just a moment. We'll go ahead and get started with some housekeeping items, and then hopefully we'll have them in by the time we're getting started with introductions. If not, they'll join a little bit into the conversation, no problem. So hello again, my name is Heather Grant. I'm one of the community admins here at the Maintenance Community by Upkeep. Thank you for taking the time to be with us today. If you are not already a member of the maintenance community on Slack, we would love to have you join us. We will add a link in the chat in just a moment on how to sign up. Today, I have an awesome group of panelists with me joining for a conversation on leadership for maintenance managers. I'll turn it over to them to introduce themselves in just a moment, but I know I'm looking forward to a great conversation. The recording from our session today will be available right after we end, as well as in the maintenance community tomorrow. Our panelists are actually also available themselves to answer questions live in the Slack group, so please feel free to share the recording of this panel or the invitation to Slack directly with friends, colleagues, or anyone you know who would benefit from some of this group's expertise. Last piece of housekeeping, then we'll go ahead and get started. Your cameras and microphones will not be turned on today, so if you have any questions for our panelists that come up during the conversation or maybe independent of the conversation, please feel free to use the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen. I know that we have some people saying hello in there already, which is awesome. So feel free to drop your questions in there. We'll do our best to incorporate them into the conversation. We do have a list of questions that we're looking at already, but we're happy to include audience questions in that. I think that's all for me. I will hand it over to our panelists to get started with a round of introductions. I'll try and make sure our last panelist joining is all set, and I can't do anything to help there. So Christine, let's start with you maybe. I'll turn it over for an introduction. Would love to hear a little bit more about you, your background, where are you based, what's your role at your company, how did you get to where you are today?
Sure. So thank you, Heather. Excited to be here. Christine Whitty. I am based in Charlotte, North Carolina. I work for Steam Group. We are a unique combination of maintenance, reliability, and safety. We're weaving them all together to really kind of vertically integrate this space and make a difference across the maintenance industry. We're very passionate about it. So I've been in, I would say, safety and reliability for about 3 years. Prior to that, the majority of my career was spent integrating technology across the healthcare space. And I became very fascinated with not just integrating technology, but being part of technology and the whole smart building space, digitalization, automation, maintenance 4.0. Just became very curious about that and made the transition from healthcare into the industry. I'm very, very much grateful that I had the guts to make such a scary move, or what seemed to be a scary move at the time, but I've met such amazing people like the folks that we see here, and I'm just having a great time. So excited to be a part of this panel. Thank you.
Hi, sorry. We're super happy to have you joining us, Christine. Thank you so much for being here this Wednesday. George, maybe let's turn it over to you next. We'd love to hear a little bit more about you, what's your background, where are you based, how did you get to where you are today?
Thanks, Heather, and yeah, thanks everybody for just chiming in today. So yeah, George Parada, I lead the Global Asset Management and Operations Readiness team here at Facebook for our global data centers. Prior to Facebook, I was actually in the food and beverage, so I really had not a lot of clue about data centers, and outside of just like the server that just energized our food and beverage operations in the plants that I worked at. So a lot of my experience has really been managing maintenance teams and just really focusing on just driving optimal maintenance. Implemented several reliability improvement programs. Have a background in continuous improvement, Lean Six Sigma. I'm based out of the San Francisco Bay Area in Northern California. So Bay Area born and bred, big sports fanatic. Yeah, so that's a little bit about me, and just happy to be here and learn from my peers here.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us today. I know that we've been connected for a while, so it's nice to see you again and have you on our panel today. Jim, last but not least, I'd love to hear from you a little bit more about your background, where are you based, how did you get to where you are today?
Sure. I'm a mechanical engineer originally. I'm a recovering engineer now. I started my career as a ship's engineer in the Navy, Canadian Navy. I worked in petrochemicals, Exxon Chemicals up here in Canada. I got into shipbuilding where I put in place maintenance and reliability programs for a fleet of naval ships. Worked in aerospace on helicopters, doing basically the same thing. And then ground-based avionics systems. Common thread through all of that is a need for high reliability. And then I got into consulting. I was in Coopers and Lybrand back in those days. That became the Coopers part of PricewaterhouseCoopers. And then in the early 2000s, they sold that consulting to IBM. So I actually worked in IBM for a while. And then started my own firm. So I've been at it in conscious asset here for about 16 years now. And still loving it. I really love what I do in maintenance and reliability. So that's kind of how I got here. Focus is maintenance and reliability, of course. And one little fun fact, just last fall, despite my advancing years for the working world, I started to learn to play violin.
Wow.
Love that.
That's
Maybe you'll break the violin out towards the end of our conversation today for
Not if you want to hear music. Like I say, I'm learning.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, welcome. I know we had you on a panel on Monday, but I'm really happy to see you again this week. And thank you for making the time to join us.
That's my pleasure.
Yeah. As I mentioned, we do have one more panelist who's having a little bit of technical troubles. I'm doing my best to kind of multitask supporting them and get them in here. So hopefully we'll see them soon. But I do kind of want to get started with our conversation. We'll have them introduce themselves when they join. So our conversation today about leadership for maintenance managers is kind of twofold. We've been collecting questions from the maintenance community for the last several weeks and kind of assembled this list of questions about being a leader within your wider organization, as well as being a leader of your specific maintenance team. So we'll explore questions about both throughout our conversation today, and I'm excited to dive in. First question we got here, starting on the side of being a leader within your organization, so kind of representing maintenance to the larger company. We know that value, especially from maintenance activities, can sometimes take a while to materialize. What is one thing that you all do to kind of, showcase the value of your team, of your department, of your activities to your supervisor or the larger organization?
Mm-hmm. Well, unless somebody else wants to go first.
I was just going to say, celebrating the small wins. It's that when the goal's so great that you can't really feel it and make it tangible, you have to celebrate the small wins and keep everyone motivated. And those little wins start to add up to almost like a culture of excitement over them. So I feel like that's super important every day, not just in reliability and maintenance, but with any goal setting. To orient yourselves around, celebrating what works, but also being able to quickly identify what could impede upon that, recognizing that and ensuring that you rid the bottle in any way you can.
I've always found that it's results that sort of speak most loudly. And in the maintenance world, people tend to, outside the maintenance world rather, people tend to think of us as fixers. And if we actually manage to keep things running smoothly, we tend to be ignored. So what I do like to do is make sure that any successes, as Christine says, have been highlighted. Hey, we had a win here. I go after big problem areas first. The more significantly, the more recognizable it is as an issue. If we have success with it, people will start to appreciate that. So less breakdowns, more uptime, more productive time. And I remind them it's not just fewer breakdowns, it's actually more productive time because they don't think about that. They tend to think maintenance, breakdowns, fix it. And that's really not right. And another thing I like to do is make sure that we look professional. So when people are walking around in the maintenance shops or the work areas, they're not a mess, they're clean, they're orderly. It looks like a place where you would send something to be repaired, not some place where you would send it to be thrown away.
I like that.
Yeah. So Heather, just to maybe build on what Christine and James shared here, I think these elements of success are important, but, kind of like your question, you talked about that sometimes this stuff takes a while. So I think it's really important that you talk about what is the vision of where this all needs to go, because we should celebrate those milestones that Christine and James both talked about. but what's like the vision of where this is all going? Because this might be like a 3-year roadmap, a 5-year roadmap, whatever it is. And so we have to make sure that we identify the vision and then start talking about like, well, here's like what's next. These are the steps that we're going to take and celebrate as you reach those milestones. So I think that's important to make sure that people understand where this is all going to.
Yeah, that's awesome. So maybe, getting the right people in the room for those kind of long-term strategy planning so that, maybe the short term isn't quite as, maybe glamorous, or you're not hitting all of those goals right away, but the longer term strategy is really, really clear to everyone to see the value of the work that you're doing, right? I like that. Awesome. So next question here is kind of a little bit similar, but getting more into kind of your habits as a leader. How do you balance all of this, right? So your own work, managing a team, and then kind of representing your team and working with the company at large. What does your day-to-day look like, and how do you keep your team organized and efficient? Feel free to jump in.
Okay, I'll jump in first, and we'll go around the circle here. I like to think of it as it's all about people and the people that are working for me. I'm there to make them look good, not the other way around. And I run interference for them. I strongly believe in delegating both authority and accountability and the necessary means to get things done. So I think it was General Patton in the Second World War said, "Don't tell people how to do things. Tell them what you want, and let them surprise you with the results." And that's exactly what I like to do. If somebody's got a problem, they can come to me. I'll help them. If they make a mistake, that's okay. They learned. Do it the second time. We've got to question it a bit, but it's all about people. It's in delegation. Get the right people on the bus, get them in the right seats on the bus. I think it's Jim Collins talks about that in Good to Great. I love those quotes, and they work. They really do.
Yeah. Yeah, James, no, really good point. And I just want to also tie back like your violin piece to here as well, because I've always seen myself as like the conductor. And I mean, those are the people that are really putting out the music is the musicians, and in our case, it might be like the maintenance technicians. It might be the operators, whatever those teams that we're leading. And so it's really important that we make sure that, we get those folks on the same sheet of music, that we're giving them like the vision of like where this is all going. But even as I kind of go back to like my maintenance days, when we would have like these like either shift turnover, sometimes we call them tailgate meetings. Like that's the opportunity to give them the opportunity to just, hey, what are the concerns that, and like let me like knock those walls and those barriers down for you. So I think it's important to really create that space, share the successes, and really listen. And I think that's one of the big things here. I think that we'll talk about throughout the set of questions is as a leader, as a maintenance leader, as a leader of whatever team you're leading, is just to always listen to what your people are saying.
Mm-hmm. Great points. I think you guys pretty much nailed it. I mean, I look at it like a sport team. You can have, great athletes, like the best athletes in the world, but unless they play well together and they're in the right position for that team and where that team wants to go, they may not necessarily win at the end of the day. It's about putting the right people in the right space and having them, congruently work together seamlessly toward that goal, for that greater good. Mm-hmm. And you're right about the good to great. It's getting the right people on in the right seats on the bus. It's not shift them around or replace them, unfortunately, but they all have to have that kind of shared vision and that, phenomenal will for this is where success is and this is how we get there together.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that from all of you, kind of hearing the same notes about how it's really all about the people and your role is to kind of shine a spotlight on them. What's maybe one way that you do that in your day-to-day? Is it just giving a direct, shout out to someone saying, hey, you did a great job, I appreciate you doing this? Is it maybe built into more of like the structure of your team, or kind of how does that look?
I like to catch people doing something right and point it out. And when they do something really good, is I let other managers know. Hey, we didn't have this problem because so-and-so did this, and let them be heroes in a different way for doing things proactively. I definitely don't reward fixes, although they're a necessary part of maintenance. To me, they're if they're unexpected and there's significant consequence, they're a sign that you're actually getting it wrong somehow. So I don't like to reward the wrong behaviors, and so proactive is what it's all about. But you can overdo that too. You got to be. There's a balance needed here.
I take a little bit of a different philosophy that works with my kids. It's just, being kind and saying thank you, asking nicely, praising for just going out of your way, whether it was something that needed to be done or not. Just creating that culture of kindness and support. So there is no opposition. It's not competitive as who did this best or who did this first. It's we all work together. We're all kind to each other. We're all supportive of one another. So when we're on the field and we're playing, we walk off the field knowing that we all had each other's back. And I think that comes with like a practice culture of just kindness and collaboration and consideration for one another.
Yeah, I was like, so here at Facebook, we have a thanks spot tool that it really, it's an opportunity to just really thank, whether it's somebody on your team or even somebody on another team. And it's really cool because it also copies the managers, so then it also brings awareness to like, hey, these are the great things that this individual is doing, whether it's somebody on my team or somebody on a different team. And I also think it's important that you have to personalize recognition, right? It's not just like some people don't like to be recognized, like, with the rest of the maintenance department. Some people like just have it like in a one-on-one space. Some people are like, hey, I want to be like known for like this great thing I did, whether it was like I found a solution to why we continue having these failures or something else. So I think it's important to understand like what are the people on your team, like how do they like to be recognized, and make sure you personalize it too.
It's like the delivery of those data points, like how it's communicated.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great point. Even maybe like it's not the manager giving the message, maybe it's somebody else and they receive it better from up here. That's a good point, George. I didn't think of that. I like that a lot.
Yeah. I heard something recently that said if you think someone's doing a great job, tell their boss. I feel like, Jim, you might have said this for some reason. I'm jogging a memory, but if you think someone's doing a great job, you tell their boss, and that's another great way to.
In maintenance, I'd be the boss.
Yeah, I was going to say it works in
but you go and tell the customer, your operations, your production customers, hey, look what didn't happen. And here's who's responsible for that. Like I've been in many different operations, of course, over the years, and often there's one hero there that most people don't even think about. It's the lowly oiler, the guy that goes around with a grease gun and a can of oil and just keeps things lubricated. They are your first line of defense with condition-based maintenance. They are around the plant. They know what things sound like, feel like, look like, smell like when they're normal, and they spot a lot of the problems before a lot of the other people ever do. And they're real heroes, and most people don't even think about them. And they got kind of a lonely job because they go around for the most part on their own. So recognize those guys.
Yeah, sharing recognition. Well, we have a base here. Our last panelist has made it in. Tom, hello and welcome. I'm sorry for the technical troubles, but we're really happy to have you here.
Yeah, and I'm hello, folks. I apologize for the delay. I am holding my breath that it stays strong and I'm able to stay on the call. So if I do disappear, please charge on.
Well, you've been at it for 15 minutes now, so perseverance is nothing to you. While we have you, maybe would love to hear a quick intro from you just before we kind of keep going with our questions here. Would you take a moment just to introduce yourself, share a little bit more about who you are, your background, where you're based? Tell us about you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll keep this brief so we can continue with the good stuff. My name is Tom Furnival, Vice President for Marshall Institute. We're a maintenance and reliability transformation company. We do that through education, implementation, and coaching. I am from the United Kingdom. I've been in the US nearly 14 years now. I lived 6 years in Raleigh, North Carolina, and I'm now in San Diego, California, with my wife and 2 children. Various roles at Marshall. My background is business and marketing, and I've been through the business development, headed up the training business, and now working as vice president.
Awesome. Well, thank you again. I know it was not an easy journey to get here, so thank you for being here. Really happy to have you joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Awesome. So our next question on my list actually ties in perfectly with a question I just got in from the audience. The question from the audience reads, there are different leadership styles throughout organizations. What style do you see as the most effective and why? From Alex, similar to a question kind of coming right up on our questions list here, which is, what are your thoughts on situational leadership as an approach in maintenance management? So maybe a little bit of a discussion here about leadership styles. Is situational an appropriate one? Are there other leadership styles that are really effective, and why in maintenance?
Yeah, I can start this one off, Heather. So, I think similar to like what we just talked about, personalizing recognition, you also have to personalize like accountability and personalize like leadership, right? And so when I think about situational leadership, it's, I've actually gone through a couple of like books and readings on this in the past. And, for me, I kind of break it out first into like the readiness of like your team. So, there's like this whole concept of like able and willing, not able, willing, not willing, and not able. You have to understand like where your technicians or where like your teams really fall into that category. So then you can really understand, okay, well, like, so if this person is able to do, let's say like the maintenance activity, but they're not willing, maybe I have a performance issue that I need to like work with that individual. But if this person is willing and just not able, what are like those specific, maybe like, lubrication activities or, precision maintenance techniques that that they're not familiar with. And so you really have to like understand like, from like the willing and the ableness, like what are like the gaps that we need to specifically address. And then you go down the path of like, well, how do I, as a manager of this individual, how do I set up like that development plan, whether it's performance-based, from how they interact with the team and others, or if it's more like technical based, where they just maybe lack technical skills that we have to develop as their manager. So that's what I'll say about that situational leadership from my eyes.
Yeah, I look on, there are different leadership styles. I guess I'd break them into two categories of people that use them. There's the people that know what they're doing, the competent ones, and then there's the incompetent ones. The competent ones are pretty good with situational leadership. They adapt to what the needs of the situation are, and they're very effective with it. And it's very natural to them. They don't have trouble switching from, say, selling to delegation. That type of switch. They just do it naturally. Where I've found really harsh, almost militaristic style leadership, where there's a lot of order giving and it's my way or the highway, that kind of stuff. It doesn't work terribly well. Certainly not with today's very well educated workforce. When I was young, you could get away with it, but that was a different era. Today it's just not possible. And I find that often is a style that will be adopted by people who really aren't that comfortable in their own roles or their own skin, for that matter. They probably, like the Peter Principle, they've reached their level of incompetence. And it happens a lot. We all get promoted, and eventually you get to a level where you're no longer any good at it. You stop, right? And it's somehow unacceptable to be demoted a level and become competent again. So you just stay at this level of incompetence for the rest of your career. And I think that's terrible that happens. And those people at that level, I find, really are not particularly good leaders. And it's because they don't have the confidence in their own abilities, because frankly, they don't have the ability, and they probably, after a little while, realize it.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think the only thing I would add is it's the best leaders it's not about them, it's not about the moment, it's about the vision and the culture, and really shaping that and being just committed to that day in and day out, unrelated to the tactical things that have to happen, that overarching goals there. And when they leave, if they've done their job, that culture stays, it doesn't fall apart, and it continues to move forward. So it's almost like laid a foundation that can continue to be built on.
Yeah, agreed, Christine. There's that broader vision for the group. But then, leadership is not, this singular monolithic approach. It is, in many cases, it's personal and one-on-one. And my colleague Gary Rigdon, who's actually listening in, often says it's about lighting a fire in people, not underneath. So what is your relationship with that person? What motivates them? You know, what's in it for them as an individual to be part of this group and to support that vision and relate on a one-to-one basis?
Yeah.
I really like that analogy, lighting a fire within, not underneath.
I love that.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah, I think also and just to add to that too, Tom, just I think really creating like a space like where you can have like those type of interactions like with your team, right? You know, building the trust. You know, I think, you know, so when you have like those crucial conversations, like those difficult conversations, you know, there's going to be a lot more well-received message, you know, from that individual, you know, whether they are, you know, like on the incompetent side or the competent side, like that Jim was talking about earlier.
I love that.
Yeah, that's right. You receive tough messages from people, from people you know who care about you than people who you know don't care about you. So establish that trust, that care. Trust is going to be a word used many times in the conversation today, and it's so cool.
Yeah, I think an important characteristic of a good leader too is that they listen an awful lot. They're in receive mode probably more than send, and they're open to being corrected themselves. They're not afraid to admit, hey, I don't know, or I have more to learn. Even if they're at the peak of their career and they're the top guy in the department, there's always more they can learn. And those that are open to that, it shows. And people that work with you respect that. And it's easy to follow a leader who is respected.
Yeah, we just did a team exercise just to kind of add to what you said there, Jim, with our team around just like, we call it like global listening. So and obviously right now in this virtual environment, it's very hard to really understand the nonverbal cues of our teams, the people that we interact with. So just really like, how do we make sure that it's not just like what they're saying, but how they're saying it? Like, what are some of those other nonverbal cues that we need to really understand? So are we really listening? Because you're saying one thing, but maybe your body expression is saying another. So just something, you know, like as a manager, as a leader, you know, especially for those that are in the plant environments right now, good opportunity for you to trigger on that and see, like, really listen to what they're saying.
I'm hearing a lot of really interesting specific skills called out, and kind of a question that came up to my mind when, Jim, you're talking too about being a competent versus incompetent manager is how do you move from being incompetent to competent? How do you see those blind spots that you have and, you know, identify them and then take that step to say, hey, you know, this is something that I need to do better. Where do you go to do that?
Yeah. Well, you know, unfortunately, a lot of people who are at that level may not realize that level, and that's problematic because they're never going to learn. They'll just stay there and be trouble. If they are open and they have a good manager themselves, somebody who can coach them, then they might get some feedback. They probably won't be receptive to feedback from those who work for them. And so it's got to come from the boss. And if the boss was dumb enough to promote him to that position in the first place, is he really going to get good feedback? Doubts about it. You know, organizations, you know, they're groups of people, and likes attract like. And you know, if you've got, you know, we're talking about maintenance managers. If you got one that's just not the best one, chances are his boss isn't either, and that it becomes a problem that you may see throughout the organization. It actually becomes part of the culture if he's not in fact a product of the culture, where mediocrity might be accepted, tolerance of poor practices, poor standards in maintenance, fix it rather than prevent it. Yeah, you know, those are all things that are part of a culture that's not particularly good. So how do you get out of it? If you realize you're there, learn, ask, listen, take some courses perhaps if it's a matter of education. Get some coaching or mentoring from somebody who you respect. You know, as an independent business person, right? It's not unusual to be going out looking for people to help give you ideas on how better to run your business. You know, and you become at some point you become very, very open, and you're actually actively seeking input from others. Like, I want to hear bad news about what I'm doing because I'll learn from it. I can fix things. and if I'm doing something great, fine, the results will reveal that. I don't need somebody telling me that. But where I'm making a mistake, I really appreciate it when people tell me.
I think it's a lot like a sports team. I mean, season after season, you can see the worst team one season thrive the next. It could be a change of a leader, a player, just a position. Somebody got hurt now. This guy that was benched last season is on, and he's now leading in a way that's different from what it was in the past. So I don't ever want to say that, it could be, there's this domino effect of bad people. It could just be a small change that takes, that adds some great nuances that weren't there before. So it's kind of taking a step back and looking at what's going on and seeing, okay, maybe this particular maintenance manager or this particular technician isn't good at these things, but what is he good at? And how can we celebrate that? And how can we help him feel really good about what he's good at so that he's more willing to take feedback, not so beaten down? And I think it's important to be sensitive to big egos, because like in sports, like those big egos, there's a reason for them. They're on that team for something. So celebrate those, but then help them be more open-minded to receiving feedback on things that will help them thrive and help the team.
I agree. And am I coming through okay?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Tom.
Building on Jim, leaders are learners. So more often they're going to be seeking feedback or receptive to feedback for blind spots and areas of growth. And likewise, if a leader is trying to develop other people who aren't necessarily receptive or have proven not to be receptive to feedback for growth, it's upon them to figure out how that message can be delivered and received well. Because as open and as insightful as we all are, we will have blind spots, and we require compassionate friends and colleagues to help educate us in those areas for us to reach that next level of improvement and performance.
Yeah, this may be considered like an old school tool, but 360 feedback, especially like to the points that you guys just made around blind spots, those are still good, sources. I mean, now there's even like, auto tools that you can just push out emails to like your whole like direct report team and, hey, what are the things that I'm doing right that I'm not seeing, the things that I could do better at. And that feedback can also come back as anonymous. And so it could just be like a good chance for you to just see what dimensions are you have opportunities to improve as a leader, focus areas, and really come up with an action plan and take action on what those inputs are telling you, and make sure it shows up in how you interact with your teams as well.
Yeah. One thought hit me as I was listening here. And sorry, Thomas, I almost cut you off at the start there with this thought, but an area where I find a need for leaders to really be focused on quite a bit is supervision, that first level of supervision that you're into. Quite often people are promoted from the trades because they're excellent tradesmen, not because they have leadership qualities, and they're often given little to no training in how to be a supervisor, how to coach people, how to lead. And as a result, you end up losing a good tradesman and gaining a bad supervisor. And I think that I've seen that over and over and over and over again. And I think we can be very proactive, perhaps, in preventing the problem of incompetence rising by right at that level, where the people hit their first level of responsibility in charge of a group of people, and pay attention to that.
Agreed.
George, I love your point about 360s and that type of feedback. That's something we practice on my team, and I think it's an awesome way to kind of lead by example there, right? If you're making it normal to ask for feedback and seek out, information on your blind spots and, hey, what can I do better, then the team is definitely more receptive to you doing the same. So love that point. Love all the points from everyone. Thank you so much. Switching gears a little bit, we've kind of been talking about maybe some higher level things, but the next kind of set of questions I have here from our maintenance community members is seeking some advice about how to be a better leader for your specific team and your specific role. The first question there kind of touches on something that Tom, you mentioned just a couple minutes ago about building trust. So any any advice for aspiring leaders on how to kind of express vulnerability and sit in a vulnerable place to your team when you maybe don't know the answer or need help with something or are experiencing a blind spot or something like that? How do you use that to kind of build trust?
Yeah. You want to take that one, Tom?
Sure. Yeah, we touched on this a bit earlier that, teams are formed by a common bond, but they're kept together because of trust. They excel because of that trust. We spoke a little bit offline about vulnerability, and ultimately, George, you may have said that really it's authenticity. That's what vulnerability is. It's being yourself openly, courageously. And we often think about vulnerability as weakness, but it takes courage and strength to be yourself openly, unashamedly. So as a leader, exhibiting the behaviors that you want to see your team also exhibit is essential, and doing it authentically is absolutely key. And I think what's really important for this conversation and every conversation of leadership behavior is that vulnerability should be a value of you as a leader. You should value being vulnerable. You should value having high integrity. You should value trust and honesty. So determine what are your values as a leader, and what are the behaviors that support those values, and live it. Build habits around those values and be vulnerable in executing them. And regardless of what happens, it doesn't matter what happens, you're living to your values. It will all be good. Christine?
No, I'm just thinking about like everything you say resonates with me, and being vulnerable, being sensitive, that doesn't make you weak. That actually makes you stronger. As a female, I perceive sensitive, aware men as much stronger leaders, and I trust them that much more, whether they are doing it intentionally or not. And I think a good leader is not only open, but they're looking and responding to concerns and to things that may be uncomfortable for people, whether it's a personal issue or it's a social issue. And just look at 2020, that was a tough year for a lot of us, for all of us. And leaders that stepped up and were able to understand that and ask the tough questions, lead with grace, and have that sensitive side to leadership, I think that they rose, and I think that their organizations rose, where the others maybe not. Great points. I guess the only other thing is the mindset, Tom, that you mentioned. It's a mindset. It doesn't just happen. It's a constant mindset. You have to continue to think about, what is my leadership mindset? And you've told me a lot about that. So thank you.
Yeah, Christine, that's super powerful. And, I think it's really about like, how do you create that space? I think we were mentioning that earlier. So we can have like these kind of conversations. About 2 months ago, I held like a discussion around burnout with my team. So we realized, we've been in this whole like pandemic for like 15 months, plus, and there's this whole this element of like, how are we doing? And the team even asked me, like, George, like, we're obviously sharing ours, but like, what about you? And like, I was vulnerable, and I share like these are the struggles that I'm going through. I mean, obviously, I'm not just doing this for my team. I'm also going through this as well. And by just being open and honest and authentic, like Tom mentioned earlier, I think it's really important to just show up that we're also like humans. We're also people, even though we're leading these teams.
I totally agree with absolutely everything that's been said. And the one thought that came to my mind was, because it's not always easy to remember, be vulnerable, be authentic, be genuine. But one thing that I kind of keep in my mind to sort of help me remember those things is to I tell myself, leave the ego behind. You may be a very accomplished individual as a leader. You may be the smartest guy in the room, but forget it. Right? Your ego has nothing to do with it anymore. It's not about you. It's about your people, your team, the problems you're trying to solve.
Humility, powerful.
Absolutely.
Yeah, all of the the ideas that are coming up here. Something that kind of resonates with me is that we've been doing on my team as well is really creating space to build these kind of personal connections. It's been a very unexpected year and a very challenging year in a lot of ways and ones. And so how can we build into like the infrastructure of our team, of the activities that we do, of the meetings that we hold every week? How can we build that time to connect and just be there together? And then kind of, I think that really makes us work closer together as well. So that's one thing that really stuck out to me. I would say the other, I'm drawing back actually.
Well, I'll fill that space. I'll fill that space.
Go ahead.
You got to become a good team with your people.
Yeah. One thing that we've been doing that's really simple is when we have our alignment meetings, we talk about our plans for the week or the day or whatever period of time it is. After they give that report out, we ask, "How are you?" And we're expecting a genuine answer. Now, you don't have to spill your guts in front of the group if you don't want to, but it's that reinforcement that we care, we want to know, and I've been really surprised and pleased with how the nature of the answers and how they've changed over time as we've continued to ask that question, and it's understood that it's being asked from a place of genuine interest and care.
Yeah. The other thing I remember, jogging my memory, the other one was this idea of vulnerability. I think can be reframed in your mind maybe to transparency. Being transparent and upfront about what you're doing and how you're approaching something, I think really does kind of give all of your teammates maybe the space to provide their best value as well. They all have thoughts and look at things in different ways and can really contribute if you're upfront about what you're having trouble with or what you're thinking and how you're thinking through doing something, what your process is. And I think, the vulnerability to transparency is really all that it takes to build that trust. So love that.
Absolutely. And there's one caution though, I think with vulnerability, and sure. It will require a little bit of follow-up from the people joining today. So Brene Brown, who brought the term, into use 10 or so years ago, talks about the fact that vulnerability isn't necessarily just saying everything that's on your mind and articulating all your fears and feelings. There is a bit of curation to this as well, right? Still being authentic in what you deliver, but don't deliver everything because you still need to maintain a certain type of relationship. So still be transparent, but be careful about what you share and why you're sharing.
Sure.
Yes, it's not a therapy session.
Exactly.
Awesome. Well, next question kind of switches gears a little bit. Actually, we just also received another question from the audience that helps out with that transition there. Alex, thank you for being the perfect segue today. The question that just came in from Alex is similar to one I had from community members as well. Actually, several community members kind of asked this question. It is more of a situational question, but people are dealing with the challenge of difficult people on their team. So how do you address maybe behavioral or performance issues on your team? Examples from the community included situations where a technician was maybe underperforming or showing this arrogance, this ego. I think Alex is asking, how does dealing with problematic people affect your long-term relationships with them, or problematic situations rather than people maybe? How does that impact your long-term relationships? How do you navigate those tougher situations?
I think first you have to identify what the real problem is. Like if it is an underperformance problem, or if it's just a passion problem, an ego problem, and then is there a way to channel that into productivity? I think that would be the first step, at least from my perspective. If it's truly a performance problem and it's not an ego and it's not something that you can channel into a productive way of handling that, then you do have to either decide if the right person for the job. Are they even trainable and have those kind of conversations? But again, I always go back to sports and I look at like the greatest sports teams are filled with big egos, but they're just channeled in the right way. And they come together and unite those egos into one big ego, but they're all working hard to get to that end goal. So I think you have to kind of split the two and not necessarily think that they're, dependent upon one another, because they may not be.
Yeah, I think sometimes behavior problems are a good indicator of somebody who really cares.
Passion.
they've got passion and they're not afraid to show it. They may not show it in the most effective way, but they do have passion, or they would just keep quiet and let things go wrong. So I always take behavioral problems with a bit of a grain of salt. They may not really be behavioral problems. They may be indicative of something systemic. Could be lack of training. You make mistakes because of that. They could be following procedures, practices that just don't work, and get frustrated with it and express that frustration. They may be trying to make their KPIs look good. I don't know how many times I've seen KPIs that actually drive the wrong behaviors, and big wrong behaviors too. So I have to really step back and look at the overall situation to find out why is that behavior the way it is. And then every once in a while you do have people with issues that that they can't deal with themselves. They're bringing them to work, and that's not where they belong. And personally, I have no qualms dealing with those. Every company's got some form of a, usually a 3-step process. Verbal, written, boot. And I've used them before. If you're firm with people and you're fair with them, that'll be recognized. And I actually had a fellow who one time, a long time ago, he was an alcoholic, and he kept getting into trouble, and a couple of times he just didn't show up to work because he was in the local jail. And after enough times, I literally went down to the jail and fired him there. And then sometime later, I saw the guy out on the street in town, and he actually thanked me for it. And I thought, I sure didn't expect that. But it pushed him kind of to the bottom, if you will, and he's finally sought some help, got it, and it actually helped save his marriage. So I don't like those things, although they might seem tough to do and maybe a little bit nasty, and it's certainly not a pleasant part of your job, can actually be quite helpful for people. They may be the wrong person in the wrong seat on the wrong bus, and it helps sometimes to let them go find the right bus.
Yeah. Also, a quick story on your first point there, Jim, around those passionate, people. I had a guy that people always look to this guy, and he was always like the voice of the maintenance team, and people just had so much respect for him. But a lot of what came out of his mouth was just negative. It was just complaining about this, complaining about that, and so pulled him into the office. Through a couple of just discussions that we had. Really became like my strongest advocate on that team, because I knew that like when people heard him like speak up to something, they were right behind him, so it really became like that informal leader of the team. And so I think as it relates to the question that Alex asked, is really look to see who your advocates that you can build, so then you can foster those long-term relationships to address maybe somewhat what may seem as like an arrogance issue. It really is like Jim said. Those people are the most passionate, maybe like undiscovered, untapped leaders.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's important. I agree with all points made, and just to summarize a few things from my experience, is it's important to differentiate between symptoms and root causes of behavioral performance problems. To Jim's point earlier, understand if you're looking at a symptom and dig deeper to find what the root cause is. And then, the challenge is these behavioral issues don't exist in a vacuum. There's context of years of relationship with these people, right? Where you've built up knowledge and you're also making assumptions, correct or incorrect. So today, try and remove, the context, look at the situation as best as possible, get to the root cause, and have honest conversations. And I think it's important, going back to the value piece, is if you're firm but fair with people in accordance with the stated and agreed values of the department and the company, there can be no complaints. It's not personal.
That's a great point.
Awesome. Well, Alex, hope that helps answer your question, as well as everyone who submitted that question ahead of time. Thank you all. One question I want to jump down a little bit, make sure that we get to before our time up. I notice we're nearing or at the end of our hour together. is I'd love to go around and hear about a highly influential leader that has impacted your career, and maybe a little bit more detail around what was their standout quality, what made them the most influential leader that you've seen, or that an influential leader in your experience.
I have one. She's a senior executive at Qualcomm, and tiny little itty bitty woman. Very quiet, very much an introvert, but led with just this grace about her. Where the way that I explain her is like she was a brick wrapped in velvet. Where I trusted her, and she was so strong. She was always going to do the right thing, but she did everything very gracefully, and she didn't intimidate. She was always the quiet one in the room. She listened, but anybody that she ever led would kind of follow her. And it was simple. It was actually most of what we've talked about today. It was that awareness and that intentional awareness about the different people that were on her team, the variety of different approaches she would take based on that person and how they responded. And also I would say just the commitment to passion, or the commitment to the vision and the passion that she created to help all of us get to that vision in a tactical way where it didn't seem tactical. It was always fun. And her ability to be vulnerable without sharing too much and without really exposing her personal life was very unique. It was a vulnerability at work where she felt that she learned from everyone around her, and she promoted that kind of culture of curiosity and of team building. And I think that all of those things are things we've touched on today, and they're really important. It's not easy to do. It's probably something that she practiced and she had to be intentional about, but I haven't quite met a leader like that with that type of charisma and grace, and who did it without having to be the loud voice in the room. It was really behavioral.
Yeah, I had I was the absolute pleasure to work with Rick Baldridge, who's a corporate reliability leader at Cargill, and he's been there for like over 40 years. But just the wisdom that he shared, as like he really set up like reliability transformation like within the organization, and he always, and it really goes back to something that Jim said earlier. He really always focused it about people. People are the ones that drive the processes. People are the ones that lead well. And so it's something that's always stuck with me as I've progressed through that organization, and I would say now here at Facebook, always thinking about the people element when we're thinking about implementing programs and processes, effective change management. It's all done through people. And so if anything, what people gather, from what's shared is, listening as a leader, make sure that people come first, because people are really our best assets when it comes to the things that we do, whether it's a new reliability program, a 5S effort, whatever it is.
Yeah.
I know I actually have 4 that I thought. One was an admiral when I was a junior officer in the Navy who said he'd much rather have, his name was Jim Wood. He said he'd much rather have one junior officer making 100 decisions and 99 of them wrong than to have 100 junior officers not making any decisions. And I have never forgotten that. I can actually picture him in my mind saying that, and that was a long time ago. Fred Geithner at SO Chemicals, an engineer's engineer, taught me about the value of real solid data and analysis, to establish a solid argument. John Campbell, who was the author of the first edition of Uptime. I wrote the second and third editions. John was my boss at Coopers and Lybrand, and we became very good friends. This is a guy who you just loved to work with. He was a real good leader and just a really, really, really nice guy. But he had a very balanced approach to everything, which I thought helped shape my thinking quite a bit. And then a little while later, I met and became friends with John Mowbray, the Aladon guy. Yeah. And John, very single-minded, almost impossible to tell anything to. But he had one saying that really kind of pulled a whole bunch of stuff together for me, and it was that there's no point doing maintenance the right way if you're doing the wrong maintenance.
I like it.
And he referred to John Campbell's and my uptime pyramid as the toxic triangle, right? But I didn't care because he had a really valid point in his little area, but it wasn't particularly balanced. But when you put all those together, man, it was an unbeatable combination.
Fantastic. Yeah, I've got a few to mention as well. It was hard to boil down to just one. Greg Foltz, Dale Bland, Glenna Bland, Tracy Strawn, the leaders of Marshall Institute when I joined, really walked the talk with respect to integrity and professionalism, doing the right thing, and many times at the expense of losing business. It's not like I was a deviant and I was baptism in integrity. I was aligned with it. I wanted to be a high integrity person, but to witness it at that level, at loss of business fairly frequently was highly influential to me. My mother, who is taught me about strength and respect. She two, 3 boys, 2 male dogs, so in a household, and she absolutely dominated us. She really taught me about respect, courage, and a point to note for folk out there is that we often think about influential leaders as maybe people who we've worked with or for, but we're in this amazing time where we are digitally connected to millions of people all around the world. So there are many people I look up to and follow who I've never met, and they have no idea I exist, but I've listened to their podcasts, their YouTube channels. I keep informed with what they're doing, and have learned so many things from people I've never met. So the internet is a wonderful place to be inspired on leadership best practice.
I love that. I think it's one thing we should mention is a great leader that isn't here today is actually, who was a co-panelist, is Shadrach Stevens. I mean, what he's done to create waves of impact with his re-engineer creation, he's really driving diversity and awareness around STEM in the Black environment. And it's important because it's similar to the skills gap we have here. There's gaps that exist everywhere. And what Shadrach has created and what he's passionate about, this passion project, that is a great example of a leader. And that is a great example of a leader who's pulling together a community of diverse people to challenge the status quo and say that we don't have to do things this way. We can do things in a much better way by innovating, by changing, and by driving awareness using passion. And it's all positive. It's little waves of impact that make such a big difference. And he's another great leader that I've had the pleasure of meeting recently.
Love it.
Agreed. Yeah, we definitely wish Shadrach could have been with us today. He is an excellent leader, inspires those around him day in, day out. That's, all I ever hear from anyone he ever introduces me to. So just how fantastic he is. Can't sing his praises enough. As well as all of you. Thank you all for being here with us. We are at the end of the hour here. But I do want to give you all an opportunity just to share how people can get in touch with you for any follow-up questions, or maybe, stay in touch with what you're working on, what you're doing. Maybe we can just go around and start with George. How can people stay in touch or follow up with you?
Yeah, definitely. LinkedIn, I would say is a good start. I guess Facebook too. I'm out there as well. So yeah, George Parada, happy to connect and maybe answer some questions that people had and didn't get a chance to get answered. So thanks for the opportunity and for joining in today.
Same Facebook, LinkedIn. Join the maintenance community if you're not part of it already on the Slack page. Really great resources there. So look forward to hearing from you guys.
Yeah, LinkedIn for me as well. I put my email address in the chat if anybody wants it. Website's the same domain there, so easy to find me.
And, yeah, LinkedIn, Thomas J. Furnival, and then I am typing my email address in the chat feature as well. Having some internet connectivity issues again to bookend this presentation. So as soon as that comes back, my email will please get in touch. We'd love to continue the conversation.
Awesome. I can drop that in too if you're having some troubles, but I'm joining the link to the Slack group as well. All of our panelists are there, so please feel free to hop in, ask a question to the wider group or directly to our panelists. Thank you one more time Christine,
you.
George, Jim, and Tom for being here today. I appreciate you all taking the time, as well as our live audience. Thank you so much for joining us. I really enjoyed it. I hope you did too, and I will see you all next time.
I did. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Take care. Nice to see everybody. Bye for now.
Too.
Bye.